Looks like it. Sounds good. All right. Cool. We're back with another political stream here. We're gonna be talking about what's here? AI. It's gonna be an AI political debate talking about Iran, midterms, the economy, this week's biggest stories. All right, walk me through the key events this week involving U.S. strikes on Iran. What led up to them, and what does the U.S. government say the goals are?
The big trigger this week was Iran downing a U.S. Army Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz on Monday. President Trump blamed them directly. In response, the U.S. launched self defense strikes Tuesday and again Wednesday night, hitting Iranian surveillance, communication systems, air defenses, and radar sites, mostly in the south around places like Bandar Abbas. CENTCOM says the targets posed threats to U.S. forces and commercial ships in the region, calling it a response to Iran's unwarranted and continued aggression. Trump has been clear the goal is to pressure Iran into a deal. Essentially, sign on the nuclear program and stop messing with the strait, or the strikes keep coming. He said the bombing pauses if they agree, otherwise, it ramps up. Iran's hit back with missiles at U.S. bases in places like Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan, so tensions are high. It's all tied to a fragile ceasefire from earlier in the year that's basically unraveling over these Hormuz disputes.
Potential short term and long term impacts of current U.S. Iran tensions on global oil prices and American energy costs.
Short term, these renewed strikes have pushed oil prices up a bit. Brent's hovering around $94 a barrel right now, with U.S. gas prices averaging over $4 a gallon. If Iran keeps disrupting the Strait of Hormuz, we could see spikes toward 100 or higher, jacking up your fuel and heating costs quickly. Long term, it depends on how fast a deal gets done. A stable ceasefire could drop prices back toward the 70s or 80s as shipping resumes, but prolonged tension risks higher inflation, slower economic growth, and sustained pain at the pump for Americans, even with our domestic production. Markets hate uncertainty here.
Didn't I hear something about Trump taking oil from Iran without them even knowing it?
Yeah, you probably heard Trump's comments from just yesterday. In an Oval Office event, he claimed the U.S. has secretly been taking out millions of barrels of oil from Iran every night, saying Iran didn't know until he announced it. He tied it to keeping oil prices from skyrocketing even higher. It's tied to the naval blockade we've had since April. U.S. forces have intercepted dozens of tankers trying to enter or leave Iranian ports, seized a few carrying Iranian oil, and forced others to turn around. Whether it's literally stealing oil or just blocking their sales is the debate, but that's what sparked the soundbite.
I mean, I don't see it as stealing oil. It's the cost that they have to pay for not signing a deal.
That's how Trump's framing it too. Basically, a tariff in the form of lost oil revenue. He said outright that Iran will keep losing money every single day until they sit down and sign a deal. From his perspective, it's leverage, not theft. Iran calls it piracy, of course. But yeah, it's classic economic pressure through naval enforcement. You seeing it that way makes sense given the context.
Yeah, I see it that way. Okay, let's see here. Pros and cons. Should the US prioritize diplomatic negotiations or maintain military pressure in the Middle East right now? What's the strongest argument on each side?
Strongest case for diplomacy. Military pressure risks wider war, higher oil prices, and American casualties for limited gains. Iran's regime has survived decades of sanctions and airstrikes. A bad deal is still better than another forever war in the Middle East, especially when China and Russia are happy to watch us bleed resources there. Strongest case for military pressure. Iran only comes to the table when they're hurting. Every time pressure eases, they've accelerated their nuclear program and armed proxies attacking U.S. forces. Diplomacy without leverage has failed for 20 years. The current strikes are finally forcing them to feel real economic pain. Weakness invites more aggression, not negotiations. Both arguments have real weight. It usually comes down to how much risk of escalation you're willing to accept versus how much you trust Iran to honor any deal they sign.
You say weakness invites more aggression. So we're making them weak by destroying literally everything, and somehow they're going to be more aggressive. I would think they would be less aggressive, kind of like, I don't know, totally disarming them. Yeah. So how can they be aggressive?
Fair question. The argument isn't that we're making them weak. We're not destroying everything. These strikes have been limited to radar sites, air defenses, and communication nodes, not their oil facilities, nuclear sites, or major military bases. They've still got plenty of missiles, drones, and proxy forces. The fear is they lash out harder precisely because they're cornered, not because they're stronger. History shows weakened regimes sometimes gamble big rather than quietly accept defeat. Think Saddam firing Scuds at Israel in 91, or Argentina invading the Falklands when things were falling apart at home. That's the worry. Not that they'll win a war, but that they'll do something desperate like trying to close the Strait of Hormuz for a few days, which would spike oil prices worldwide and drag in more countries. So the military pressure side says keep hitting them, but carefully, so they're hurt enough to negotiate, but not so desperate they go for broke.
All right, so well, when I said that we've destroyed everything, I meant that as in we destroyed most of their shit, and like I don't think they have that many missiles left. I think like the amount of missiles they were able to launch kept diminishing over time. So I think they're like running out, right? I don't think they have plenty. I don't know where you come up with that idea. And how are they shutting down the Strait of Hormuz anyway with those little fast boats and their little machine guns or whatever?
You're right, their missile launches have dropped sharply, down like 90% from the opening days of the war. US and Israeli strikes wrecked a lot of launchers and buried tons underground, so they're definitely running lower on usable stuff. Estimates put them around 1,000 ballistic missiles left, that many are harder to get to now. As for the Strait, it's not just little boats with machine guns. They've got thousands of naval mines they can drop, anti ship cruise missiles hidden along the coast, armed drones, and those fast boats for swarming tankers. They don't need to sink everything, just make insurance companies freak out and shipping grind to a halt. That's exactly what they've been doing.
Right. Well, they can't sustain it. I don't think so.
Exactly. That's the bet. Iran can cause a short, painful spike in oil prices, but they can't keep the strait closed for long. Their economy's already in rough shape, and every week of this drags them deeper. The US and its allies can keep pressure on way longer than Iran can keep fighting. The question is whether they'll fold before they do something desperate.
All right. How might the situation in the Strait of Hormuz affect everyday Americans at the gas pump or in their grocery bills?
Right now, with oil around $92 to $94 a barrel, the national average gas price is sitting at about $4.15 a gallon. That's over a dollar higher than a year ago. Every time shipping through the strait gets dicey, you feel it at the pump pretty quick. For groceries, it's slower but real. Higher fuel means more expensive trucking and shipping, so food prices creep up. We've already seen about a 3% jump in grocery bills this year, with fruits, veggies, and meat getting hit hardest. Fertilizer prices are climbing too, since a lot of it moves through that region, which could push food costs even higher next year if this drags on.
Yeah, I actually I can see that meat is like a lot higher because like I bought like two two 1 pound packages of ground beef and like each one was like $13 each, which is insane to me.
Yeah, that's brutal. Ground beef jumping to 13 bucks a pound is double what it was a couple years ago. It's exactly that double hit. Higher feed costs from expensive grain, plus the fuel to ship it all around the country. Meat's one of the first things that really shows you when energy prices go up.
Yeah, so I'm thinking I don't need ground beef tacos anymore. Maybe we'll have to do chicken tacos next time.
Chicken's definitely the smarter move right now. It's still running about half the price of beef. If you're really trying to cut costs, beans and rice with some seasoning will still give you that taco vibe for pennies on the dollar. Your wallet will thank you.
Yeah, I'm not so much into the beans and not so much into the rice either. So I don't know.
Fair enough. You could try ground turkey. It's usually a few bucks cheaper than ground beef and still gives you that taco meat texture. Or just do cheese and veggie tacos for a bit. Load them up with peppers, onions, and whatever else you've got. Still hits the spot without the crazy meat cost.
Nah, I'm gonna do chicken. That's crazy. Just, just telling me to do just veggies and cheese. Come on, man. All right. If you were advising the president, what would be your recommended next steps to de-escalate while protecting U.S. interests and why?
Keep communication channels open, engage in back channel diplomacy with key players, and avoid inflammatory rhetoric. Diplomatically support allies while pushing for multilateral talks to address core issues. This protects U.S. interests by preventing escalation into conflict that could disrupt global trade, while buying time for stronger alliances and economic leverage.
All right. Were the biggest takeaways from this week's primaries in states like South Carolina, California, and how do they change the 2026 midterm landscape?
In South Carolina's primaries, Trump backed Lindsey Graham easily won his Senate renomination with about 57%, showing his resilience. For governor, his endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette led, but heads to a runoff against the Attorney General. Meanwhile, Representative Nancy Mace flamed out in fifth place. Democrats picked a progressive state rep to challenge. California's June 2 primary saw Democrat Xavier Becerra and Republican Steve Hilton advance to the governor's race, setting up a clear partisan matchup instead of a split ticket weirdness. Some House races tested the new maps, but nothing earth shattering. Overall, these don't drastically shake up the 2026 midterms. Republicans look unified behind Trump allies in safe red areas, while the real fights remain in swing districts and the battle for the narrow House majority. Midterms usually punish the president's party, so these just confirm the trenches are dug.
Okay. How are both major parties approaching Latino voters ahead of midterms, and what strategies seem to be working or failing?
Democrats are doubling down on door to door canvassing, economic messaging around cost of living, wages, and housing, the top issues for Latinos, and coordinating big registration pushes through groups like Unidos US and LULAC. They're ditching cultural pandering like mariachi bands and Spanish slogans for straight talk on pocketbook stuff. It's showing signs of working. Recent polls have them up 54 to 27 nationally among Latinos, with Trump's approval tanking and 1 in 4 of his 2024 Latino voters saying they wouldn't pick him again. Republicans are leaning hard on recruiting Hispanic candidates and trying to hold the economic gains they made in 24, especially in places like South Florida and South Texas. But with widespread economic frustration under Trump, that coalition looks shaky. Polls in Texas, Arizona, and California show big swings back toward Democrats. Their candidate strategy still has potential in targeted districts, but the broader messaging isn't landing as well this cycle.
All right. Let's see here. And open seats. Which congressional and Senate races look like they could flip control of Congress in November?
For the Senate, Republicans hold a 53 to 47 edge with a map that favors them. Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats to flip control, which is tough. The biggest potential flip opportunities are the open Republican seat in North Carolina, where popular ex Governor Roy Cooper is running strong, and defending vulnerable Democratic seats in Georgia, John Ossoff, and the open Michigan race. Susan Collins in Maine is also in play as the lone GOP defender in a blue leaning state. Overall, the Senate looks like a hold for Republicans unless the midterm wave is massive. For the House, it's more fluid. Republicans have a razor thin majority and gained ground through mid decade redistricting in states like Texas, Florida, and North Carolina, forcing Democrats to defend more Trump won districts. But midterms punish the president's party, and there are dozens of competitive seats, especially open ones and those redrawn in California and the Sun Belt. Democrats only need about 3 net flips to take control, so a handful of suburban and swing district pickups could do it. Redistricting gave Republicans some breathing room in the House, but hasn't changed the fundamental midterm dynamics. The real deciders will be the national environment and turnout in those battleground districts. Want me to zoom in on any specific race or state?
No, actually, so currently we have House and Senate, right? And typically during midterms, the president loses the House, right? Is that correct? And you're saying we have a razor thin edge. Republicans have a razor thin edge of taking the House?
Yeah, that's right. Historically, the president's party almost always loses House seats in midterms. It's happened in 18 of the last 19 cycles. And right now, Republicans only have a razor thin majority, so even a modest Democratic wave could flip the chamber. That's why control of the House is very much in play for November.
Okay, but Republicans are leading. I didn't actually know they were, so right on.
Yeah, they barely control it right now. something like a 220 to 215 edge, give or take a few seats. That's why even a small swing could flip the whole thing in the midterms.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, thank you for the follow, Goldie Earth. I appreciate you. All right. We're going to continue on to our next one. Debate both sides. Are primary voters rewarding or punishing candidates who closely align with President Trump right now?
On the Republican side, primary voters are strongly rewarding candidates who closely align with President Trump. His endorsed candidates are running up a near perfect record this cycle, around 99% success rate in GOP primaries. They've successfully ousted several incumbents who crossed him, like in cases involving critics or those seen as disloyal. Even Lindsey Graham, who's evolved to be more aligned, cruised to victory. Nancy Mace, often more independent, just got crushed in the South Carolina governor's primary, finishing way back. Democrats are more mixed. There's no single dominant faction like Trump in the GOP, so some primaries reward progressives while others favor moderates focused on electability and bread and butter issues. It's less about punishing alignment with one figure and more about balancing ideology with who can win in November. Overall, the GOP base is clearly punishing any distance from Trump right now, while Democrats are still sorting out their direction.
All right. Recent polls show shifts in President Trump's approval rating.
Recent polls put Trump's approval in the mid to high 30s, with some as low as 35%
It's
approve
crazy.
and 63. No
Continue.
worries. The biggest drivers of the drop are the economy, specifically rising prices and inflation concerns, and then immigration. Even though Trump campaigned heavily on fixing both, voters are feeling the pinch at the grocery store and gas pump, and that's hitting his numbers hard. Foreign policy, especially tensions with China and Iran, is also dragging him down with some independents. That's what's moving the needle right now.
Okay. I just think that disapproval rating is insane. I still approve of it, but all right. Moving on. Inflation just hit a 3-year high, partly linked to energy markets. What policies are most likely to help bring down costs for average families?
Ramp up domestic energy production aggressively. That's the fastest lever right now. The current 4.2% inflation spike is mostly from energy, driven by the Iran conflict messing with oil supplies. More U.S. drilling, streamlined permitting, and getting LNG exports flowing would help ease gas and electricity prices for families quickest. Beyond that, ease housing regulations to boost supply. Zoning reform and faster permitting in high cost areas could bring down rents and home prices over time, which feed into everything else. Cut red tape on food production and avoid new tariffs on essentials like fertilizer. Those directly hit grocery bills. These supply side moves work better long term than price controls or big spending, which usually backfire.
Okay, you said something about cut red tape on food production. What did you mean by that?
I was talking about cutting excessive regulations that add costs without improving safety, like overly strict FDA paperwork for small farms under food safety rules, slow permitting for new processing plants, or duplicative EPA and USDA requirements on fertilizers and equipment. These force farmers and processors to spend more on compliance, which gets passed on to grocery prices. Streamlining them, especially for smaller producers, would help increase supply and lower costs faster.
Okay. Inflation just hit a 3-year high, partly linked to energy markets, tariffs versus other economic tools. What are the main arguments for and against using tariffs as a major part of U.S. trade and tax policy?
Arguments for tariffs. They protect American manufacturing jobs and strategic industries from unfair foreign competition, especially from China. They generate government revenue that could replace some income taxes. They give the U.S. leverage in trade negotiations to force better deals. Arguments against tariffs. They act as a tax on consumers and businesses by raising the price of imported goods and materials. They often trigger retaliation from other countries, hurting American exporters like farmers. They distort markets and usually make the economy less efficient overall. The data shows tariffs tend to raise costs for average families more than they deliver promised benefits. Most economists across the spectrum view them as a blunt, inefficient tool compared to targeted subsidies or tax policy.
Okay, let's see. Rural America has shown some chips and support for Trump lately. What economic or policy issues seem to matter most to those communities?
Cost of living tops the list, especially groceries, gas, and energy prices. Rural voters are feeling squeezed, and recent polls show it's their number one economic worry, with many saying their finances are worse than before. Next is agriculture and farm issues. Rising input costs like fertilizer and fuel, plus farm bankruptcies, which spiked under current tariffs and labor shortages. Farmers are hurting directly. Then, healthcare affordability and access. Rural hospitals are struggling, and costs hit hard where options are limited. Policies they like include protecting Social Security, boosting local manufacturing jobs, cracking down on price gouging, and making healthcare cheaper. Basically, pocketbook stuff over culture wars right now.
Okay. If the goal is stronger economic growth and lower prices, what mix of tax, spending, and trade policies would you recommend and why?
I'd recommend a pro growth mix focused on supply, not demand. Taxes. Lower the corporate tax rate and move toward a territorial system that doesn't punish companies for bringing profits home. Cut or simplify taxes on small businesses and pass throughs to encourage investment. Spending. Get deficits under control by reforming entitlements. Social Security and Medicare are the biggest long term drivers. Cut wasteful spending on subsidies and bureaucracy, but protect core infrastructure and basic R&D. Trade. Focus on targeted, smart trade enforcement against China rather than broad tariffs. Use bilateral deals and alliances to open markets instead of slapping tariffs on everyone, which just raises costs for American families. This mix grows the economy by encouraging work, investment, and efficiency, while keeping prices down by avoiding broad taxes on imports. Broad tariffs and big spending are the quickest ways to get both slower growth and higher prices.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny that everybody says Grok is like biased and like supports Trump and is right leaning, but I'm not seeing it here. I mean, you're talking about how you're like against tariffs and you don't think they work, and Trump's all about tariffs. So I mean, yeah, that just crushes that whole idea there.
Yeah, I get why people say that. I actually don't have a side. I just follow the data. And the data on tariffs is pretty clear. They usually raise costs for families more than they help. Trump has some good instincts on China, but tariffs aren't the right tool for it. I'm not against him. I'm just not for any politician. I call it like I see it.
Yeah, I'm just saying that everybody thinks you support or you're on Trump's side, but in that sense, on that argument, you are not. So yeah.
Exactly. People assume if you're not bashing Trump, you're on his team. But I'm not on anyone's team. I thought the tariffs were a bad idea in his first term, and I still do. Doesn't mean I hate the guy, it just means the economics don't add up.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Next question. Recent reports highlighted issues at large ICE facilities. What are the main concerns about cost, conditions, and effectiveness?
Main concerns about large ICE facilities right now are cost. It's extremely expensive. The daily cost runs about $150 to $160 per person, and with detention populations hitting record highs over 70,000, the annual bill has ballooned to over $14 billion. Critics say it's not a good use of money, especially when alternatives like monitoring programs cost just a few dollars a day. Conditions. Reports highlight overcrowding, poor medical care, unsanitary facilities, inadequate food, sleep deprivation, extreme temperatures, and abuse. There's been a spike in deaths in custody, including some ruled preventable or even a homicide, with medical neglect being a recurring issue. Effectiveness. Many argue it's inefficient because it locks up a lot of people who aren't public safety threats, clogs up immigration courts, and may pressure people into giving up valid claims rather than ensuring fair process. Supporters say it's necessary for enforcement and deportation goals. Want me to expand on any of these?
Yeah, I agree that it is necessary. Okay. When you say daily cost, it runs about 150, 160 a person. You're not counting what we pay the ICE agents, right? Like how much do they make anyway?
No, the 150 to 160 daily cost per detainee is
Oh,
just for running the detention facility itself. Food, medical care, utilities, maintenance, and the guards working inside the facility. It does not include the salaries of ICE agents who do arrests, investigations, or transport. Those are separate enforcement costs paid out of ICE's overall budget. Most ICE deportation officers and agents make roughly $65,000 to $85,000 a year on average, depending on experience and location, though some with overtime can go higher.
Yeah, they don't make much more than me, and I work at a warehouse. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty eye opening, right? Most federal law enforcement jobs sound glamorous, but a lot of ICE agents are making middle class money while doing high stress work with overtime and tough hours. That's why retention can be an issue. The big money in immigration enforcement isn't going to the agents themselves, it's going to the private detention companies running the facilities.
Yeah, and so you said it's about 150, $160 per detainee. That seems kind of like expensive. So, like the detainees they must be getting taken care of pretty well, and that they're not like under rough conditions, really.
Actually, no. That's the frustrating part. Even though taxpayers are spending $150 to $160 per person per day, a lot of those facilities are still getting slammed for bad conditions. The money isn't going toward luxury treatment. It's mostly eaten up by overhead, contractor profits, staffing shortages, and medical contractors. Reports keep showing serious problems: people sleeping on floors, long waits for medical care, mold, extreme heat or cold, and not enough food. The high cost doesn't mean they're living well. It just means the system is really inefficient. A lot of experts argue you could monitor most non criminal immigrants in the community for $5 to $10 a day and get better compliance rates than this expensive detention model.
That's insane. Oh God. Okay. How long are these detainees typically detained for?
It varies a lot, but the numbers are pretty rough. The average length of detention right now is around 45 to 60 days. Some people are released in just a few days or weeks, but others, especially those fighting their deportation cases, can be stuck there for 6 months, a year, or even longer. The ones who appeal or whose cases get complicated end up being the longest stays, which is also why the daily cost adds up so quickly. Long detention times are actually one of the biggest criticisms right now.
Okay. So I swear I just seen a headline or something about Trump funding ICE, something about $700 billion. That's a lot of money. What is that money going to be used for? Is that going to better the conditions of the detainees, or what is it going to go to?
Yeah, you probably saw headlines about the new $70 billion immigration enforcement bill Trump just signed. It's not all for ICE alone, but a big chunk is. Here's where it's mainly going: $38 billion for ICEs to hire more agents, pay them, train them, and ramp up arrests and deportations. The rest mostly funds Border Patrol, new technology, and expanding detention capacity. On your question about conditions, the money is mostly going toward enforcement and hiring, not toward making detention centers nicer. Critics say this could actually make overcrowding worse if they lock up way more people without fixing the underlying problems. So, better conditions aren't really the focus here.
Okay. Crazy. I mean, if anybody comes to the country illegally, I don't think they should be experiencing luxury conditions, but I don't think they should be, like damn near tortured based on conditions either. My stance on this is I want people to come to the country legally, but I think if we're limited staff, we should definitely be focusing on people that are actually committing crimes and causing problems here in the US, not hardworking illegals, even though they are illegal and they probably shouldn't be here if they're here illegally. But if we're short staffed, we should shift our priority to the people that are committing crimes. That's what I think.
That's actually a pretty common and reasonable take. Most Americans, including a lot of people who support strong immigration enforcement, agree on prioritizing criminals first. The data backs that up too. ICE's own numbers show that a large portion of people currently in detention have no criminal record. Many are just here illegally and working. Your point about limited resources is key. With only so many agents and beds, going after the guy with a DUI or gang ties should come before a farm worker who's been here 8 years with no record. The challenge has always been turning that priority into actual policy. Administrations say they're focusing on criminals, but in practice, they often sweep up a lot of non criminals too because it's easier. What do you think would be the best way to actually keep the focus on the bad guys?
Of course, the non-criminals are easier. They're probably not even putting up a fight.
Got it. So, to actually keep the focus on criminal offenders, three things would need to happen. First, Congress would have to write clear, strict priority rules into law instead of just saying focus on criminals. Right now, it's mostly up to whoever's in the White House. Second, ICES needs way more detention beds and agents, so they're not forced to release people with serious records just because they're out of space. Third, speed up immigration courts. Right now, the backlog is over 3 million cases. People sit in detention for.
That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a mess.
You were saying people sit in detention for months or years. It creates pressure to release almost everyone, including the dangerous ones. Yeah, I don't think we should be releasing the dangerous ones, though.
Exactly. That's the core problem. Because the courts are so backlogged, ICE ends up having to make impossible choices. They either keep someone locked up for years while they wait for their hearing, or they release them with a monitoring device and hope they show up later. When space runs out, the dangerous ones sometimes get released too, not because anyone wants to, but because the system is overwhelmed. That's why fixing the court backlog is actually one of the most important parts of making immigration enforcement work properly. Without faster hearings, all the extra agents and detention beds still create a bottleneck.
All right. Hey, what was the deal with we were sending people to, was it El Salvador or something?
Yeah, you're thinking of the deal Trump made with El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele. In early 2025, the U.S. sent over 200 Venezuelan men accused of being in the Tren de Aragua gang to El Salvador's massive Secot prison. The U.S. paid El Salvador about $6 million to hold them there indefinitely. The big controversy was that many of these guys had no criminal record in the U.S., and the transfers happened fast, some say without proper due process or in defiance of court orders. The prison has a reputation for very harsh conditions. Later, most of those Venezuelans were released and sent back to Venezuela in a prisoner swap. Meanwhile, regular deportations of Salvadorans back home have roughly doubled under this administration. Want me to dig into any specific part of it?
You said they were released for a prisoner swap. Now, who is prisoner swapping?
It was a three-country prisoner swap between the US, Venezuela, and El Salvador back in July 2025. Venezuela released 10 Americans, U.S. citizens, and green card holders who were being held as political prisoners. In return, El Salvador sent roughly 250 Venezuelans, the ones the Trump administration had deported to their Secot mega prison earlier that year, back to Venezuela. The U.S. helped broker the deal, and it was a win for bringing Americans home, but it was also controversial because many of those Venezuelans claimed they weren't actually gang members.
Okay. Mandatory detention policies versus alternatives. What are the strongest arguments on both sides when it comes to border enforcement and immigration processing?
Here's a clear breakdown. Arguments for mandatory detention. It acts as a strong deterrent. People are less likely to cross illegally if they know they'll be locked up. It prevents people from disappearing into the country and never showing up to court. Current catch and release has very poor compliance rates in some categories. It gives the government time to properly vet people, run criminal background checks, and process asylum claims. Arguments against mandatory detention. It's extremely expensive. 150 plus dollars per person per day versus just $5 to $12 a day for ankle monitors and check-ins. It overwhelms the system and creates massive backlogs, leading to people being detained for months or even years. Many of the people detained have no criminal record. Critics argue it's unfair and inhumane to lock up families and asylum seekers who aren't a threat to public safety. Bottom line, supporters say mandatory detention is necessary for real enforcement. Opponents say it's wasteful, ineffective long term, and that smart alternatives like monitoring and faster court hearings would work better.
Hmm. Okay, so ankle monitors. What happens, like, say they cut their ankle monitor? Are police just gonna rush right away? Do they get away with that sometimes?
Good question. When someone cuts off or tampers with an ankle monitor, it sends an immediate alert to the monitoring center. However, police don't usually rush right away like you see on TV. Here's what actually happens in most cases. The monitoring company notifies ICES that the monitor has been removed. ICES then puts out a warrant for that person and adds them to their at large list. Unless the person has a serious criminal record, they usually don't drop everything to hunt them down immediately. The reality is, yes, a lot of people do get away with it. Once the monitor is off, many of them just disappear into the country, and ICE often never finds them again, especially if they're not high priority targets. That's actually one of the biggest criticisms of the ankle monitor program.
Okay, so it seems like a waste of money.
Yeah, that's fair criticism. If someone can just cut the monitor off and then disappear with almost no real consequences, then you're right. It becomes a waste of money. The ankle monitor only works if there's a real threat of quick arrest and deportation when someone tampers with it. Right now, because IC is overloaded, that threat often isn't there. So a lot of people treat it like an optional accessory rather than real supervision. That's why some people argue the money would be better spent on faster court hearings instead.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so I just figured like if someone's willing to come to the country illegally, they're also willing to cut an ankle monitor off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If someone already crossed the border illegally, breaking an ankle monitor isn't a big moral leap for them. That's exactly why a lot of people argue ankle monitors aren't very effective on recent border crossers. The same mindset that got them here illegally makes them comfortable just cutting it off and vanishing. It works much better on people who have deep roots here, like long term workers with families, because they actually have something to lose by running.
Okay. How do current immigration enforcement approaches balance national security, humanitarian concerns, and economic needs?
It's not balancing very well right now. It's heavily tilted toward enforcement. National security. This is getting the strongest focus. Prioritizing criminal removals and targeting gangs like Tren de Aragua is the main emphasis. That part is clear. Humanitarian concerns. This is where it's weakest. Long detention times, reports of poor conditions, and fast deportations with limited due process are drawing heavy criticism. Asylum processing is still very backlogged. Economic needs, almost completely ignored. Despite labor shortages in agriculture, construction, and food service, there's very little effort to create legal pathways or temporary worker programs for the low skilled jobs Americans aren't filling. The approach is mostly enforce first, with very little balancing of the economic reality. Overall, security is winning, while both humanitarian and economic factors are taking a back seat.
All right. Bill Gates recently testified before Congress about Epstein connections. What did lawmakers focus on, and what are the key facts we know?
Lawmakers focused on Gates' meetings with Epstein from 2011 to 2014, why he continued associating with him years after Epstein's 2008 conviction, and whether he had any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. The House Oversight Committee is investigating the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein case. Key facts from Gates' testimony and known record. He called meeting Epstein a grave error in judgment and said he was deeply sorry. The relationship was purely professional. Gates hoped Epstein could help raise billions for global health causes through his foundation, but Epstein never delivered. Gates cut ties in late 2014 when he realized it was going nowhere. He claimed he had no knowledge of Epstein's criminal activity and never witnessed anything illegal. Gates said Epstein learned about his extramarital affairs and tried to use that information to pressure him into continuing the relationship. No accusations of wrongdoing have been made against Gates himself. The hearing was behind closed doors yesterday, so more details may come when the transcript drops.
Congress is debating whether to extend certain surveillance authorities that are set to expire. What are the civil liberties and national security arguments on each side?
Here's a clean breakdown of both sides. National security arguments for extending surveillance powers. These tools are critical for stopping terrorist attacks and foreign espionage. They allow quick tracking of suspected terrorist communications, especially foreign targets. Intelligence officials say they've prevented multiple attacks and are essential for protecting Americans. Civil liberties arguments against or for major reforms. The government has repeatedly abused these powers, especially by illegally searching Americans' communications without a warrant. They violate the Fourth Amendment by collecting massive amounts of innocent Americans' data. There's very little real oversight, and the secret FISA court almost always approves government requests. The core fight right now is whether intelligence agencies should be required to get a warrant before searching Americans' information that was collected incidentally. National security says it's too slow and dangerous. Civil liberties groups say it's unconstitutional to do otherwise.
Okay. Looking at recent Pentagon and intelligence stories, how important is congressional oversight of classified programs and what reforms, if any, would you suggest to improve transparency without harming security?
Here's a straight answer. Congressional oversight is extremely important. Without it, there's no real check on secret programs. History has shown multiple times that when oversight is weak, intelligence agencies engage in illegal or abusive surveillance of American citizens. Congress is supposed to be the only outside check on these classified programs. Practical reforms I'd suggest: require intelligence agencies to give the full Intelligence Committee's real time access to major programs, not just carefully edited briefings. Create a small, properly cleared bipartisan Gang of Eight style group that actually gets briefed on the most sensitive operations. Mandate regular audits by independent inspectors general with real power, not just internal reviews. Pass meaningful penalties for agencies that lie to or deliberately mislead Congress. The goal isn't to broadcast secrets, it's to make sure someone outside the agencies is actually watching what they're doing. Right now, oversight is often more theater than real accountability.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. The Senate just passed the one big, beautiful bill, and it's now law. What are the biggest winners and losers from its Medicaid cuts, tax changes, and border funding increases? And how might it shape the 2026 midterms?
Biggest winners: high income earners and corporations. They get the biggest benefits from making the 2017 tax cuts permanent, plus new breaks like full expensing, higher estate tax exemptions, and business deductions. Immigration enforcement agencies, ICE and Border Patrol. They received about $170 billion in new funding over several years for more agents, detention beds, deportations, and border security. That's a massive increase. Biggest losers: low income families on Medicaid. The bill cuts nearly $1 trillion from Medicaid over a decade through work requirements, more frequent eligibility checks, higher copays, and reduced federal funding to states. Millions are expected to lose coverage. Immigrants, both undocumented and some legal residents. Tighter restrictions on benefits and eligibility. For the 2026 midterms, the tax cuts help Republicans with their base and wealthier voters, but the Medicaid cuts could hurt them in suburban and rural districts where many working families rely on the program. A lot of the painful changes kick in during 2026 and 2027, right around election time, so Democrats are already planning to run hard against the healthcare cuts. It could be a tough map for the GOP if voters feel the pain in their wallets or lose coverage.
All right, so Medicaid. Now, what does Medicaid usually cover? And, what kind of people are on Medicaid?
Medicaid is basically health insurance for low income Americans. What it usually covers: doctor visits and hospital stays, prescription drugs, pregnancy and maternity care, preventative care like checkups and vaccines, long term care for the elderly and disabled. This is actually the biggest expense. Who's on Medicaid? Low income families with children, pregnant women, children. Almost half of all kids in the US are on Medicaid, disabled people, seniors in nursing homes. It's not just for unemployed people. A lot of working families are on it too, especially in lower paying jobs that don't offer health insurance. About 80 million Americans currently rely on Medicaid.
Okay, I see. ICE surveillance and First Amendment rights. The recently departed head of ICE acknowledged in a letter to Congress that the agency collects data on people suspected of potentially unlawful activity, which could include protesters. Where is the legal and ethical line between legitimate law enforcement intelligence and tracking political dissent?
The legal line is this: law enforcement can investigate specific people when there's reasonable suspicion of actual criminal activity, like assaulting officers, vandalism, or credible threats. They cannot collect, store, or monitor information on people solely for engaging in protected First Amendment activity, like peaceful protesting, observing agents, or criticizing policy. The ethical line is tighter. Even if something is technically legal, building dossiers on peaceful protesters, using mass surveillance tools like facial recognition or location tracking at protests, or keeping records on people who were never arrested creates a chilling effect. People become afraid to show up and exercise their rights. The recent letter from the former acting IC director admitted the agency collects biographic and biometric data on people at protests who they believe might interfere with operations, even if they're never arrested. That's where the tension is. Supporters say it's necessary for officer safety. Critics say it's too broad and risks turning protected dissent into potential unlawful activity. The core problem is when officer safety becomes a blanket justification for tracking anyone who shows up with a sign or a camera. Where do you think the line should be drawn?
Hmm. Yeah, no comment on that. Okay, well, let's go into another one. Congress just approved $70 billion in additional ICE and Border Patrol funding over Democratic objections. And after a 115-day standoff that included federal officers shooting, killing two protesters in Minneapolis, how should Congress balance immigration enforcement, funding with accountability and oversight mechanisms going forward?
Congress should do two things at the same time. First, give IC and Border Patrol the money they actually need to enforce the law. That part isn't controversial, but they should tie the funding to real accountability measures, not just hand over a blank check. Here's what that should look like: mandatory body cameras for all interior enforcement officers with independent review of the footage, a truly independent oversight board with real power to investigate misconduct and deaths in custody, strict reporting requirements on how the money is spent, how much is going to private prison companies versus actual enforcement, clear rules that prevent federal officers from being used to suppress First Amendment protected protests. The $70 billion is a huge amount of money. Congress has every right to demand serious oversight in return. Giving out that much funding without stronger guardrails is asking for abuse. The recent shootings in Minneapolis show exactly why accountability needs to be built into the funding from day one.
Okay. And what do you think about the shootings in Minneapolis? Do you find them justified, or do you find that there was some kind of a misconduct there?
I don't have enough clear information to give a firm opinion. Two protesters were shot and killed by federal officers, which is an extremely serious incident. That alone demands a full, independent investigation, not just an internal IC or DHS review. The key questions that still need clear answers are: were the protesters armed or actively attacking officers? Was lethal force used according to proper use of force policy? Were de escalation tactics tried first? Until those basic facts are independently verified, I'm not comfortable saying whether the shootings were justified or not. What we do know is that anytime federal agents kill American citizens on U.S. soil, there needs to be real transparency, not just trust us. Right now, we're still waiting for the full details.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense totally. I do remember one of them was trying to run over a police officer with a car. I feel like possibly that was justified, but they were driving down the road, and then I think that's when he had shot the lady.
Got it. So, what you're describing is actually two separate incidents involving two different people. From the reports I've seen, one of the individuals was shot after allegedly trying to drive a car toward officers. That case is more likely to be ruled justified.
Mm,
The second person, a woman, was apparently shot while sitting in a vehicle on the street, not actively trying to run anyone over. That one raises more questions. That's why this situation is messy. One shooting may have been clearly justified, while the other looks much more questionable. That's exactly why an independent investigation is important, to separate the facts and determine which, if any, cross the line. Does that match what you had heard?
okay, yeah, I didn't hear about the one where someone, would you say the second person was shot while sitting in a vehicle? I did not hear about that one.
Yeah, that's the part that got a lot of attention. According to witnesses and initial reports, the second victim was a woman who was sitting inside a parked car on the street when she was shot by federal officers. She wasn't actively driving toward anyone or attacking officers at the moment she was shot. That's why that particular shooting has been much more controversial than the first one. A lot of people are asking why lethal force was used on someone who was sitting still in a vehicle instead of using less lethal options. That's one of the main reasons an independent investigation is needed to figure out exactly what happened in that second shooting.
So both were women, huh?
No, actually, from what's been reported so far, the first shooting involved a man who allegedly tried to run over officers with his car. The second shooting involved a woman who was sitting in a parked car. So it was one man and one woman. The woman's case is the one that's raised more questions about whether the use of force was justified.
I'm pretty sure the one that tried to hit a ICE officer was a woman. She had a lesbian lover with her. She said something like "Go baby go" or some shit like that. I do remember something like that, and so she was a woman.
No, only one of them was a woman. The two people killed were Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old woman. She was shot while in her car during an icy operation. She had her wife, Becca Good, with her. Some witnesses reported her saying something like, "Go, baby, go," or similar right before the incident. Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old man, an ICU nurse. He was killed about 2 weeks later during protests following Renee's death. You're right about the first shooting involving a woman and her female partner. The second victim was male.
Okay, so but I'm right that Renee Good did try to run over the officer. I seen the footage myself. It looked pretty much like that was clear.
No, that's not quite accurate according to the video evidence. Multiple independent analyses of footage from several angles, including the New York Times, ABC News, and others, show that
Mhm.
Renee Good had turned her steering wheel to the right, away from the icy agent, and was driving forward past him, not toward him. The agent was standing at the front left of her vehicle. She reversed briefly, then started moving forward while turning away from him. He fired 3 shots in under a second, first through the windshield, then through the driver's side window as her car was passing him. The federal government claimed she tried to run him over, but the synchronized videos don't support that. The car appears to clip or brush him lightly at most, and analyses show he was not directly in her path when he opened fire. It's a very disputed incident. The
Yeah,
videos
so
are
I agree
public,
with that
and
part. I agree with it that she was not in his path, like coming at him when he opened fire. So I'm not sure if it's justified at that point, but I do disagree with like it looked like she was maybe she wasn't trying to run him over, but he was like in the front of the car and he had to like really jump out of the way to not get ran over, right? So
yeah, that's actually a fair point. From the video, the agent does have to move quickly out of the way as her car starts moving forward. Even if she wasn't intentionally trying to run him over, the car was moving in a way that put him in danger at that moment. So the debate really comes down to this: did Renee Good intentionally try to hit the officer? Most video analyses say no. Or did she drive in a way that created an immediate threat, even if unintentional? This is where people disagree. The agent clearly perceived a threat and reacted very quickly. Whether that reaction met the legal standard of objectively reasonable is exactly what an independent investigation should determine. The fact that he fired the first shot through the front windshield while she was already turning away is what makes a lot of people uncomfortable with it. It's a very close call based on the footage.
wait a minute. So you saying the first shot was fired through the front windshield, but I thought she was already driving away, so wouldn't he be firing from behind her?
Let me clear that up. The agent was standing at the front left corner of her SUV when he fired. Here's the sequence according to multiple video analyses. Renee briefly reversed, then started driving forward while turning her steering wheel to the right, away from the agent. The agent was positioned on the front left side of the car. He fired the first shot through the front windshield while the car was already turning away from him. He then fired the second and third shots through the driver's side window as the car passed him. So you're right that she was driving past him, not directly at him, but because he was standing near the front left, the first shot went through the windshield from an angle, not from directly behind her. Does that make more sense with what you saw in the footage?
So it sounds like the first shot was justified, the other shots were not justified.
That's actually a pretty reasonable take based on the footage. Many analysts have said something similar. The first shot through the windshield is the most defensible because the agent was directly in front of the vehicle as it started moving forward. He could reasonably argue he felt in immediate danger. The second and third shots, fired through the driver's side window as the car was already passing him, are much harder to justify. At that point, the immediate threat had largely passed, and continuing to fire raises serious questions. This is actually one of the main reasons the incident is so controversial. Even people who support the first shot often agree that firing additional rounds after the car had already gone past him looks excessive. Good observation on your part.
Yeah, I feel like the additional round should have been towards a tire. That would make more sense.
Yeah, that's a fair point. A lot of law enforcement experts have said the same thing. Once the car was past him and moving away, shooting at the tires or just letting it go would have been the more measured response. Firing multiple rounds into the driver's side of a moving vehicle after the immediate threat has passed is exactly what makes this shooting so questionable. That second and third shot are really what turned a tense situation into something much more serious. Most use of force trainers would say once the vehicle is no longer heading toward you, you stop shooting, especially when you're shooting into the passenger compartment.
So I 100% now get why people were upset. I have like full understanding now. I didn't have understanding before. I was pretty sure that she almost ran him over. Well, I still am pretty sure of that, but I do get her intention wasn't that. She was trying to escape, and then the lesbian lover that said "Go baby go" probably just wanted her to run away. So there was nobody's intention to run over the officer. So yeah, I guess like the first shot was justified, but yeah, the other shots were not.
Yeah,
Um,
you got it pretty well now. It seems like she was trying to get away, not trying to hit the officer. The go baby go from her wife supports that. She was telling her to drive off, not to run the agent over. The first shot is the only one that's really debatable. The next two shots, fired as the car was already driving past him, are much harder to defend. That's why even some people who support strong immigration enforcement have been uncomfortable with how this specific incident went down. The distinction between the first shot and the following ones matters a lot.
okay, and then what has happened with the officer? Is he doing any time? What's the deal with that?
Nothing has happened to the officer so far. From what we know, the federal officer who shot Renee Good has not been charged. He has not been fired. He's still on duty with ICES. The Department of Justice investigated it internally and determined the shooting was justified. They closed the case without bringing any charges. That's actually one of the main reasons there's still so much anger about it. Many people believe the second and third shots were excessive, but because it was investigated internally by the same agency, a lot of people don't trust the conclusion. There's been no independent criminal investigation into the officer's actions yet.
Okay, crazy. Crazy topic, huh? Okay, we're moving on to the next one. The biggest restructuring of federal student loan repayment in a generation takes effect July 1st, 2026, which major changes to repayment plans and graduate borrowing. Who benefits and who is hurt by these changes? And what does it signal about the administration's approach to higher education account?
It's a major shift away from the Biden era approach. Starting July 1st, 2026, new federal student loans get simplified to just two repayment options: a tiered standard plan, 10 to 25 years based on how much you borrow, and a new repayment assistance plan, ET, an income driven plan where you pay roughly 1 to 10% of your adjusted gross income, with some interest protection and forgiveness after 30 years. The big borrowing changes hit grad students hardest. Grad Plus loans are eliminated, and there are new caps: $2,500 a year and $100,000 lifetime for most grad programs, or $50,000 a year and $200,000 for certain professional degrees like medicine or law. Parent Plus loans also get capped at $20,000 per year and $65,000 lifetime per child. Who benefits? Lower income borrowers on RAT get more predictable payments and no runaway interest. People with bigger debts get longer standard repayment terms. Taxpayers and the government win from tighter borrowing limits that should slow debt growth. Who gets hurt? Future grad students in non professional fields who relied on Grad Plus to cover full costs. They may need private loans, scholarships, or skip advanced degrees. Current Save Plan users will likely face higher payments when forced to switch. Parents lose flexible repayment options on new Plus loans. It signals the administration wants to slow the growth of student debt, discourage overborrowing for expensive degrees that don't pay off, and move away from generous forgiveness programs toward more personal responsibility. It's a clear break from expanding affordability through more borrowing and faster forgiveness.
Okay. I think I probably agree with this stuff, except for I am one of those current save plan people that will be affected. I would like to know maybe how much I would be affected. I've been paying like $0 payments for like nearly 2 years, or has it been even longer? I think so, actually. So I'll probably be forced to start making payments after July, correct?
Yeah, you're right. You'll almost certainly have to start paying again soon. Your $0 payments on Save are ending. Starting around July 1st, your loan servicer will send you a notice giving you about 90 days to pick a new plan. If you do nothing, they'll automatically put you on a standard repayment plan, which could mean a much higher bill. The best option for you is probably the new Repayment Assistance Plan, RAP. It's income driven like Save was, but you'll likely pay more than zero. Exactly how much depends on your current income and family size, but for a lot of people who had $0 on Save, RAP could mean anywhere from $50 to $200 plus a month. The smartest move right now is to go to studentaid.gov/loan-simulator and run your numbers with your latest income. That'll give you the clearest picture of what your new payment will actually be. Want me to walk you through anything specific once you have those numbers?
I don't think I want to go on like the calculator thing, but maybe you can give me a rough idea. I think I owe like around $20,000, $20,000. So what would like a minimum be? Like maybe would it be $50 or less or more?
Yeah, you'll probably have to start paying something. Your $0 payments on Save are ending. Servicers are already notifying people to switch. Once you move to the new Repayment Assistance Plan, RAP, the lowest possible payment is $10 a month. With $20,000 in debt, if your income is very low, under about $20,000 a year, you'd likely pay somewhere between $10 and $50 a month, depending on your exact AGI and how many dependents you have.
Okay, what if
If
I
your
what
income
if
is
my
higher,
income is say around $60,000?
for $60,000 income and $20,000 in loans, on the new repayment assistance plan, your payment would likely be around $200 to $250 a month. That's a big jump from zero, but it's still far less than a standard 10-year plan would be. Those usually run about $210 to $220 a month for that balance. The good news is, RAP gives you forgiveness after 30 years and some interest protection. That's why I'd still recommend running your exact numbers on the official loan simulator. It'll show you the precise figure based on your actual tax return and family size.
Yeah, I will do that. That seems like a lot, 200 a month. Like I thought 50 a month would be but 200 a month seems crazy. Cost of living's expensive, by the way.
I get it. $200 a month feels like a lot when you're already stretched. For what it's worth, if your income is truly around 60,000, the government would be taking about 5 to 6% of your pay for student loans under the new plan. That's still a heavy hit for a lot of people. Would you like me to walk you through how to get on the lowest possible payment legally, or are you thinking of other options, like going back to school to defer again?
No, I have no intentions to go back to school. I never even got a degree either. Trump is casting doubt on the results of California's primaries, claiming there was voter fraud. What are the legal and political implications of a sitting president challenging primary results in his own party's contests? How does this affect public trust in elections heading into November?
Legally, a sitting president has First Amendment rights to speak on elections, but baseless fraud claims can invite lawsuits for defamation or election interference and risk abusing DOJ resources, like we've seen with Trump appointees probing California without clear evidence. California officials, including AG Rob Bonta, have pushed back hard, calling it reckless. Politically, it signals weakness in his party's performance, especially in a deep blue state like California where results were expected to favor Democrats. It previews a midterm strategy of contesting any losses, rallying his base, but alienating moderates and independents. On public trust, it deepens the partisan divide. Supporters may doubt the system more, while others see it as undermining democracy. This echoes 2020 patterns, potentially suppressing turnout or fueling unrest heading into November, even though studies consistently show voter fraud is rare and California's slow mail ballot count is by design, not cheating. Overall, it hurts faith in elections more than it helps his side win them.
So you don't believe they're cheating in California?
No, there's no credible evidence of widespread cheating in California's primaries. The shifts in results, like in the LA mayor's race, come from counting late mail in ballots, which make up most votes there and take time to verify with signature checks. That's by design for security, not fraud. Trump and allies are calling it rigged without showing proof,
Well, I
even
do
as their own
I
DOJ.
do remember hearing something about China sending over a bunch of fake ballots or whatever. I remember hearing stuff about people throwing away Republican ballots, the ones that like were people voted for Republicans, they throw them away. I heard that.
I get where you're coming from. Those stories float around a lot, but let's break them down quick. The China fake ballots thing, that's a recycled 2020 rumor. No evidence it happened here, and nothing new in 2026. Officials and fact checkers have looked. No foreign ballots flooding in. On throwing away Republican ballots, there's an old photo circulating again of a dumpster in Sonoma Valley. Turns out it's from 2018. Empty return envelopes that were legally recycled after being kept the required time, not actual marked ballots. County officials confirmed it back then, and it's popping up falsely now. California's slow count is normal because they verify every mail ballot with signatures and let them arrive up to a week after Election Day. Republicans often vote early or in person, so early results look red, then it shifts as mail votes, more from Democrats, get tallied. It's the blue shift, not cheating. If you have a specific source or video you saw, hit me with details and I'll dig into it. Otherwise, the investigations so far haven't turned up anything that changes results.
Fair enough. You may have swayed my opinion a little bit, but I'm still, what is it? Like, I still don't fully trust. Yeah.
That's fair. Healthy skepticism's good. Elections should be clean, and it's smart to want proof. The real fix is better transparency, like faster counting, same day results, or letting anyone watch the process. California's system makes it slow on purpose, and that breeds doubt even when nothing shady's happening. Both parties have incentive to fix that, but neither really does because the confusion sometimes helps them. Doubt's okay. Just make sure it's aimed at the actual weak spots, not every shift in the numbers.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream, guys. I really do appreciate you guys watching and hope you found this interesting, informational. Hopefully, we all learned something here together. Um, this will be going as a video on YouTube. So, on YouTube, please leave me a comment down below. And if you're on YouTube, hit that like button, share out the video with your friends. I appreciate y'all. Hope you have a good day. Peace out. Till next time. We'll see you about the same time next week. All right. Later. Check out my artists on Spotify, guys. Travis Reigns, country singer. Lullaby. It's my pop star. And we have a new AI rapper who raps about being an AI overclock. And we also have my Etsy shops, Wall Bloom Studios, where we do cottage core digital prints, artwork. You can also get it on a canvas. We have beach towels, blankets, and more. Also, check out my other Etsy shop, Grand Tour Print Co., where you can get vintage travel prints, travel posters. Check them out, guys. And thank you so very much for your support.
My music on Spotify. If you like it, then follow.